and that should, in theory, get larger on your screen.
Yes.
So, well,
A little too small.
that's a little too small. So yeah, I can. Okay, so this is by me. As I said, that's a touch sort of indulgent to get you guys to read something I've written. I was asked to write this article by the P-Health conference because they had a section on games for health, and they wanted someone to keynote the session and to write an article about games for health. And so we had 3 other games that were presenting in the session, which is why I referenced those specific ones for this conference, right? Because this paper was written after the normal period of submission, right? So this was an invited paper. Even though it was an invited paper, I still tried to write it sort of as well as I could, because the thing about writing a paper is that once it's in the publication record, it's there for, ever, right? It's there for a long time. And if your name's attached to it, when someone searches for your name, they can find these old papers you've written. And if you write things badly and you publish them and they look bad, then, it just looks bad. So you do want the things you publish under your name to look at least reasonable. Right? So even if it's an invited paper, you shouldn't just whack it out there and not care. You should try and actually make it valuable publishing. And so when you do your master's thesis will go on public record, right? It's not going to be something you can hide later. So if they don't say stuff that or don't sort of be so casual about it, that doesn't really matter at all. No one will ever see it. That's not entirely true, right? This was again tough. So now this area, one of the things I talk about in this is the idea of a taxonomy for games. Do you guys know what a taxonomy is? Kind of vaguely a bit. I think for me the most obvious taxonomy is Darwin's taxonomy of animal species. Right? So he breaks down all animals into their kingdoms and then into their species and subspecies and defines what it means to be a species rather than just looking similar. Because a lot of the work before Darwin came around, people were breaking animals down by how they looked. Right? So if 2 animals looked similar, they were the same thing. Right? And when you do DNA analysis and actually look at genetics, you go, wait a minute, these things, the reason they look the same is because they're fulfilling the same function in their environment, but actually they're very, very different genetically. Right? Now, there was a lot of argument about that taxonomy because it was easier for people to understand a taxonomy based on things looking and doing similar things than on some internal analytical genetic thing that you could extract out of it. Right? Is that a relevant thing to know genetically, the distinction? Or is it more relevant to know what that animal fulfills in its role? I see the discussion on fish. Is fish a useful category to say something is a fish?
You can say fish is more important than others.
Well, yeah, the thing is that what is a fish? And there isn't really a clear biological definition of what a fish is.
Something that lives in water.
Pretty much, it's just something that lives in water and isn't a crustacean. Or is
fish.
But sometimes crustaceans are seafood or fish, sometimes, depending on who you talk to. So yeah, fish is not a good category, right? Because it does talk about, the thing it does. And for a long time, dolphins and whales were considered fish. We now know that they're not. But yeah, there's that, how you break down your taxonomy, how you talk about things, and how they're related is interesting. So in this paper, I start looking at taxonomies. So I give an overview of kind of saying, games, personalized health, games are good at personalizing experiences. We like the term flow because I like flow. And I looked at the Games for Health project, which is part of Ben Sawyer's area. And basically what he did was said, if you want to have a taxonomy for Games for Health, then first of all, you have to have a taxonomy of serious games, right? And then you can break down into a taxonomy for Games for Health. So this was the taxonomy he created for Games for Health. Over here, I have, and I'm going to have to zoom out for this because it's big. You can find the taxonomy of serious games, which I still don't know why I've got this huge black area here. Anyone else know why I've got a huge black?
No, we don't have that.
Okay, it's just me. Okay, I did not do that. Okay, so here, if you're watching this on your screens, and you can vaguely see it up there, Games for Health is one of the vertical categories you create. And maybe I have to restart my screen. Maybe I'll go like that. No, that didn't help. And he then basically goes the category of type of serious game and the organization or type of organization who is kind of requesting this game. So if the government asks for a game for health, then within that they're usually public health and education or mass casualty response. They are sort of governmental health things. Okay? If the government asks for an advert game, then it's probably some political game, right? Because the government's about politics, usually. If the government asks for a game for training, it's some sort of government employee training scheme or something, right? So he's trying to kind of categorize the games and the projects that make those games by what area of serious games it is and who is commissioning it. You can argue that whether that's a good breakdown or not, right? Is this the right way of breaking up a space in a taxonomy? Because there isn't just one taxonomy.
Even more interesting, why would you present that taxonomy as a two-dimensional grid? Taxonomy is typically three.
Yes. So when you have a look at taxonomies, and I was looking at various taxonomies, and I've got looking at the one I've got here somewhere. Nope, is it other games? That's another game. Maybe it's this one.
Did you try that game, by the way?
The TD game.
The guy you have on your LinkedIn list is a friend of mine, working down there.
Right. At plus point. Yeah, no, I'm seeing if they want to collaborate in a project. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Say hello to him if you
Okay. You could say hello to him from me. You could say, hey, my lecturer wants to talk to you. Yeah. So I'll go back. So these, that was the cognitive game. So cognitive fun was another game we're looking at, but I was trying to find the Velocity guys. I've got them here somewhere. I will just have to search for it. Okay, so if you have a look at taxonomy. So these are traditional taxonomies in terms of, you can see here, these are tree structures, right? So often kind of doing the, in this case, it's smart homes are controllable homes, programmable homes, and intelligent homes. So they're doing a taxonomy around smart homes. You'll see animal species. There is an interesting D3.js taxonomy. So here you can see you've got, they sometimes do these in spirals. So they have a thing in the middle and they spiral the graph out. Marius was just looking at one of these, which was doing, about poverty and
wealth
and corruption. Right? Saying basically, the wealthier you are, your society tends to have lower corruption. So poverty breeds corruption, or corruption breeds poverty. They didn't know which way around. But it's the standard representation of a taxonomy. Is more list all your things and then try and group them. Right? And so here, by creating this kind of 2D approach, now I have to get back to my prezi, which is this one. No, this one. Yeah. By doing it 2D, you're kind of saying, well, I've got this category here, which I break down the serious game, break it down into one of these categories.
And each one of those.
And each one of those
have another dimension.
Has another dimension that breaks down, right? So it would normally be drawn as a point with, say, 2, 4, 7 subcategories. And with each of those, you break it down into another 6. Don't do that. I've got to actually grab it and move. So yeah, you break those down into more categories. And so you then get these 7 by 7, I think it's 49 categories. So you end up with 49 different categories of games, initially listed on one category and then listed each on a second category. Okay. And the idea of these taxonomies is to somehow say that games within a taxonomy bear some relationship to each other. Right? Is often the reason why you break things down is to try and find useful features that say, well, your games in this category doing this job have similar features or do things in similar ways or have similar effects or those sort of things. That's not always the case, and you can argue what is the right taxonomy for games. One of the standard ones and not used here is the genre-based taxonomy of games. Right? So first-person shooter, horror game, sports game, simulation game, and there is a lot of debate in the community about whether or not that's a good taxonomy or useful taxonomy for games, because the genres have kind of come out haphazardly, in a sense. It was just by usage rather than by playing, and so they're not really systematic. It's more organic development, and so it's got weirdness where it combines, like an FPS game tells you something about the perspective you see when you play the game. But if you have a horror genre and an FPS genre, there's nothing distinct. You can have a horror FPS.
I'm guessing that's what this is for.
Yeah.
Combining genres.
And combining those genres to say, well, actually, it doesn't really matter if you are doing a political advert game, right? So if you're doing advert games for the government, it's a political game. This says nothing about whether it's a first person, third person. It doesn't say whether it's a strategy or a puzzle game. It doesn't say whether it's a sports game or, it doesn't actually tell you what kind of game was made. It tells you kind of an area that it was designed for or being designed around. And so this is a very different breakdown to the standard genre kind of breakdown that you see. And genres start falling apart when you get people combining them constantly, right? So one of my colleagues in New Zealand, they made a game that was a racing puzzle platformer action adventure game. So you're in a car, so it's a racing game, you're going to race around a track, but the tracks are puzzles that you have to solve, so it's a puzzle, and they're a platforming puzzle game with driving, where you get also to shoot other players and AIs. So it's an action puzzle platforming driving game, and you collect bonuses and upgrade your vehicle. So and you search for things. So it's an adventure game.
But that's an issue with all genres. I mean, movies, books,
movie genres,
music. You have the same issue. I mean, they aren't clear cuts. You have the mix of genres.
Yeah. And this taxonomy of games will create issues of projects that overlap multiple
But
categories.
again, I disagree with the author saying that this is a taxonomy. It's a classification.
Yeah.
To me, a taxonomy involves many more layers, and it's not equally divided in dimensions. This is try to say, well, these are the dimensions, and then you have cells for each dimension. You could add 3 or 4 dimensions to this. You wouldn't try to make a big hierarchy of three of them.
Because if you have a look at this taxonomy, has got 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5, 6 layers, up to 6 layers.
And they don't have the same number of children. All these
items in each category. I mean,
I would say it's a classification.
This thing works with inheritance. This doesn't.
Yeah.
Isn't that the difference?
Yeah, the classic taxonomy, you inherit. Well, this does have inheritance. It's just, minimal, right? If you're inheriting one layer,
Yeah,
and that's it.
But if you want to make a taxonomy out of this, what you would have is that you have games for health, and then you have governmental games for health as the next level, and then you will have this public health education, mass casualty responses as under there. So you would try to make these more like abstract nodes if you want, all the way down. So, but you can make them into hierarchy if you want to. You can map it into hierarchy.
Then it would be every single one would have.
Exactly. And they were saying
that
all would have the same number of children. And so it doesn't make sense.
It feels more like a classification or a categorization rather than necessarily a full taxonomy. Now, what I do is I actually take that and I kind of expand it to start adding what might be considered kind of taxonomical elements. Like I'd start talking about features that they have, and then you can start breaking them down further, right? And adding extra layers, which you wouldn't see in just a 2D representation. Right? So here you can see this is this is subjects. So in nature.com, these are the subject ontology, which they've formed into a taxonomy. Right? So this was a discussion on ontology versus taxonomy.
But I think that the issue here is that in the taxonomy, you kind of stick to one dimension. This is the dimension of subjects. You can make a taxonomy. So you can make a taxonomy of games for ... And then you can say, okay, you have professional and under professional advertisements. You can make a taxonomy there. But if you have 2 different dimensions, you can't make a taxonomy that is not trying to mix them up. So the problem here, if you're going to have both subjects taxonomy and the type of field in which the game is being used, it's not going to be one taxonomy. You have 2 taxonomies then, and you may create a map or a categorization that's in between. But you can't make a taxonomy on many different dimensions.
Yeah, because in this sense, what he's doing here is those are broken down. So if you took a taxonomy around serious games, and actually, okay, we'll talk about games of health. Some of these kind of categorization things he's doing. So where it struggles is advogaming advogaming in education is social issue games. Because he's got these categories, he has to try and fit into every one of the categories goes on top. Sometimes they don't fit very well, right? So where defense is doing games for advogaming in defense, right? I mean, he's got the propaganda and recruitment games as advogames and defense. That's actually kind of a different thing. It depends on where you are, whether the defense force actually kind of advertises for itself. Right? Is that advertising? Is it training? Is it So sometimes when you try and break the categories down, like marketing, communication, and advogaming, of course, are almost the same thing, right? Marketing is advertising, so that's kind of an obvious category. But marketing and communications, doing games for health, wouldn't that be like healthcare doing advogames? So I'm thinking when you look at like this category, you can't see, well, you can see my mouse up there, but marketing communications, they've got advertising treatment. So games for health, marketing communications. How is that difference between healthcare and the games? Conceptually. I would, because advertising is what marketing communications do. So yeah, the categories are challenge. But within this, I refer to that project and say, well, you know, this was his global. Let's break down games into these categories. We'll call it a taxonomy.
Which would be wrong.
Which we think is actually a categorization of serious games.
Yes.
Now, why might an author use the phrase taxonomy rather than categorization?
Sounds more fancy.
No, more scientific.
Fancy scientific.
Yep. It sounds fancy, more fancy and scientific to say taxonomy than category. Right? Because, you know, any schmuck can make a category. Only a scientist could make a taxonomy. Right? And even sometimes you'll see people use the word ontology when they mean vocabulary. Right? So let's have a shared vocabulary or a shared thesaurus of what things mean. And I'll use the word ontology because it's more sciencey. Right? So, yeah.
But if you go back there, if you weren't really develop a taxonomy, you can develop a taxonomy for the categories on top. So let's say if you look for games, so you can say there are games for personal development and games for professional development or company development. And the personal development, you have games for health, you have games for training, and games for education. In the professional games, you have adver games, games for science. So in that case, it's a taxonomy because you have two levels and you have grouping of concepts underneath.
Yeah. So remember last week we talked on Tuesday we talked about who benefits from the games. So the higher level category you could put in would be who is the beneficiary? Is it you as the gamer or the company you work for? So if you look at those 7 categories, as Rena was saying, you could say games for education and health
And training.
and particularly training. The person playing the game is benefiting from the game. Advogaming, games for scientific research, games for production, and games as work. The player isn't really benefiting at all from playing the game. Someone else is benefiting, right? So that would be a who benefits, first level breakdown. And then you'd say, I put these games under these categories. And then within games for health, you could say, is this social, psychological, or physical health, right? Because social, psychological, and physical health only make sense as categories within games for health, right? You couldn't actually apply those categories within games for production. Is it games for cognitive production, physical production, or social production? Doesn't really, those aren't categories you would make within production, right? Production, might say, you could make physical versus virtual, right? So is it information production or is it actual physical production of a product? Are you making a product or are you making more information? Then you could break down games, okay, this is an information game for production, or this is a game around making a physical item for production, right? So you think within that area and how it naturally breaks down. Right? So that's kind of what I'm doing in here, where they do within the games for health. He actually does start breaking this down into more of a taxonomy, but again, he's got a two-dimensional categorization rather than taxonomical way of thinking. So he breaks down into personal, professional, research and academic and public health, which you could argue is, and since I've written this paper, I have talked with Runa more about taxonomies and have changed my opinion on them, because that's what you do when you learn. And I would be far more critical of this as a taxonomy now than I was when I wrote this paper. No, because he's the expert on semantic web stuff, right? And so he's not an authority fallacy. But when I talk about semantic web and ontology, they go, he's got done a bit more than I have. So I take his opinion as valuable.
One interesting thing here is that we have talked about that is that if you look at the area of health activity, I always find the last one an odd one, informatics.
So
So you have preventive, therapeutic, assessment, educational, informatics. Well, I would say analytics would probably be interesting because that's what you would use the information for, to analyze, but not informatics. I mean, the information itself is not really a good reason for or doesn't fit with the other types. It's for preventive reasons, for therapeutic reasons, educational reasons, and informatics reasons. What's that? I mean, that what
generating data. I don't care how you use it.
But analytical reasons, maybe.
Yeah, analytical, educational, and analytical. Informatics is a different word type.
It is.
So I mean, even if the category was analytics, you might get personal health records. Well, yeah, that's more just generating data, right? So games to generate data, which is it is a category, but it doesn't fit with health activity really. So, so again, he tried to
but not categorize personal health analytics, like we talked about. I mean, trying to use games to understand the data for an analytical reason, not just because you have data.
Yes, not just to generate data. So, so writing this, I take this position on. Okay, these are relatively. I'll keep referring to taxonomy, even though we agree that they're not. They're taxonomy, but it's kind of relatively flat to some extent. It doesn't really tell me much about what the purpose of the game is, what you're trying to achieve, or who it's for, or things that as a game designer I would want to know: the target audience, what I'm trying to do for the target audience, right? Not just who's funding me. Right? So,
so before you go on, because that's the interesting thing here is, for who do we develop this taxonomy? It might be for those having money to spend. So I want to spend money on personal projects and assessment. Okay, then it's fine. But what will we use it for? What will it help us to understand or deal with? I don't see that clearly described.
Well, I mean that actually speaks to the larger area in terms of the word serious games. I think I described to you why we call it serious games. Not because that actually is necessarily the best descriptor, but because it makes people in authority go, "What do you mean?" And once they start talking to us, we can then explain to them what we mean. But if you use something that's very obvious that they already think they understand, then they won't talk to you. Right? So you make something intentionally confusing, so they'll start a conversation. And this is, knowing Ben a bit, is designed to show to government agencies who have money and are wanting to spend it, to be able to say to them, look, these are the categories of games we make. Which isn't necessarily like, oh, that can be made.
But to us as developers, it's not very helpful at all.
It might be coming in the wrong direction, right? Because I'm wanting to know what I make, not who funds me, potentially. Right? In this case, games for professional practice assessment. So it's a measurement game. The personal assessment is some sort of self-ranking. So these are closer to what you might.
So just take an example. You would think that in such a classification, two cells that are next to each other are kind of share some commonalities, and two cells far apart from each other don't share. So if you go to the upper right corner, public health messages, and the lower left, personal health records, they seem to be pretty close to me.
Well, public health messages.
Based on the records,
you could make public health communication messages based on their records. So,
and it's informatics.
Yeah, that would be information being. First responders. So public health and therapeutic first responders versus personal education, first aid, medical information. First aid and first responders, pretty much doing a bit of a similar job, right? So those two categories are actually overlapping, where one are professional people who who do first aid, and one are personal people who do first aid, right? So it's still, they're doing the same job, right? It's still a job around first aid. So if you're teaching CPR, where does a CPR game go in? Is it a first aid thing or is it a first responder thing?
But I'm more thinking in terms of if you're looking for input, if you're looking for help in designing a certain game, we will look for something that's similar. And then, so in the information case, it's these are the ones dealing with information and distribution and access and representation. If you look for, as you say, first aid or first responders, that it's the same. I mean, the problem with this kind of categorization is that it has nothing to do with the content, nothing to do with the actual elements. It's just, which means that it's hard to use that for a guidance for us if you want to find some papers or some projects that are relevant to us.
Yeah, so it doesn't provide the benefit that you might see if you were looking at, say, nature.com's taxonomy on publishing, right? Where you could see people publishing papers similar to me might actually have something to say.
Would it be more helpful if it was at a higher resolution? If there were more cells in it?
Well, what would make it a taxonomy would be if it actually
not make
do a
it taxonomy, make it more useful.
More useful.
Because for me, it looks so coarse. It's like, okay, you have these 5 different things, and these 5 different things, and they amount to this. And it's one precise word. And like you took, what was the example?
You might almost call it, have you guys heard the gap analysis as a business modeling technique?
Yeah.
Right? A gap analysis, where what you do is you put a whole bunch of things down here and a whole bunch of things along there and find where there aren't products. And go, oh, look, there are no products in this combination of these 2 features. Maybe I should design in that area, right? To say, look, that's the blue ocean research kind of area, is finding combinations of things which aren't heavily researched, right? So it's a fairly common business technique.
But what I would say is that it's not a question of granularity, it's a question of what dimension you chose. I think they chose the wrong dimensions. So you should think about different types of dimensions. So I had on my whiteboard, I had a short discussion with Simon before coming here, because what you may want to look at what are the game mechanics being used? What is the platform being used? What is the type of medical expertise or field? So these are the kind of dimensions that you may want to see rather than
That's what I mean, like education crossed with games for education is learning. That doesn't amount too much.
Yeah, because
it's not necessarily
these dimensions are wrong. So I would rather use the red dimensions over there. I mean, game. What is the technology? What are the mechanics? What is the medical area expertise you need? What type of activity does the game involve when you deliver it? What is the environment? Are you playing by yourself? Are you playing with others? Are you playing with the medical experts around you? I mean, this would be the helpful, because then you could try to find the categorization of the project. You say, okay, I want to have an idea about this kind of game. What would be the technology I might need? What would be the type of activity I might design? And
that would be like a multi-dimensional cause and effect analysis.
Much more, yes. That I would think would be more useful than these kind of 2. I think the problem is there are wrong dimensions.
Yeah,
not the granularity of the dimensions.
So in my reading of the let's see, am I going to be able to get back to somewhere useful? Here we go. Right. So we do. I start with this, and then in the paper, if I come out and stand down, so I go through and as Melissa said, the examples are clearly mine, right? You guys have probably heard some of these examples before. So yeah, it's clearly me who's saying this, but I start breaking down, instead of saying, okay, I start using things like target audience, and I talk about narrow and broad. And the question I put over here is, every player is an individual, so is narrow versus broad a useful categorization?
I think you're talking about effect, I think. Not the
target audience.
Yeah.
So there's also the specific versus general effect. Are you targeting a specific treatment type, a specific outcome, or a generalized health outcome? But the question is, do you guys think that those are useful subcategories?
An audience?
Narrow or broad?
Depends. If it's like specific, how to treat like dementia, that would be a narrow thing. But if it's more broad, that could also be good, like how to treat an injured knee. It's a specific task, but the audience is much bigger, and they span a greater age range and also yeah. Well,
But so the thing is, do you think it's a useful category at all, rather than like, yeah, is that a useful dimension?
I think the challenge is where do you set the boundary between narrow and broad? What is in between, and how many do you have in between?
Yeah.
So it's kind of difficult to use for categorization. It's characteristics, but I think it's difficult to say, okay, this is narrow, this is broad, because that's what we want to do with categorization. Say it's clearly one or the other. Narrow broad is where is the limit between narrow and broad, and would that be some like kind of constant boundary?
would be when comparing two items, I guess.
Yeah, but
so the classification exists when comparing two things. But if
One is more narrow or more broad than the
no,
other.
but
which
if,
is why I
if
say it's
you,
a
yeah, it's
characteristics.
broader or narrower. If you take one specific item, you can't say that it's narrow or broad without comparing it to something else.
Well, in my mind, when I wrote this, I was thinking that there is an absolute scale as well as a relative scale. So for a narrow project, and I've seen this, there is a group in Oslo who are looking at doing games for, there's a specific, they've actually got a kid who has a combination of medical conditions. So, okay, I'm going to reject the call and say I'm in class. Okay. So they have a single kid they're developing games for, right? So he's blind and mostly deaf, and is mute, and they're developing games for him, right? And they're not really, and specific physical disabilities that he has. So they're developing games around him as an individual, which for me is the narrowest kind of game you can make. You say, right, I've got this one person, and I'm just going to make games for that one person. That's the narrowest health game you can make. You can't make one narrower than, in terms of the all target audience, than a single person.
But then again, there are some examples of games that started off like that. Take Meatboy. He made his game for himself specifically.
Yep.
It's pretty awesome. It's pretty huge. It's pretty broad.
Yes, so its target audience was one.
Yeah.
But so that's in the design stage, it was targeted for one person. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that game doesn't have broad application. So we then have a discussion on whether something was designed for one use and is being used in another way. So what the one we get in health games, in cognitive games, is Portal. Right? Portal is used often as a cognitive training game, and you guys have seen that in the earlier papers. Right? Portal has a beneficial effect on puzzle-solving abilities. Right? It wasn't designed around being an educational game, but it's being used that way. Right? So do you say, and this becomes a discussion on serious games, do we say anything that is used for a serious purpose becomes a serious game or not? So if I use Minecraft it's an interesting one because it's got Minecraft.edu, right? There's an educational kind of branch of Minecraft specifically for doing education in Minecraft. But Minecraft wasn't designed as an educational game. Is Minecraft a serious game? Or is it a game that's being used for other purposes?
Wouldn't that be like saying, is pen an artistic tool or is it something to write with?
Exactly. Is a pen an artistic thing, or is it merely a tool? Now, some things were created specifically for artistic purposes. Right? So, my first wife was an artist, and the concept of a canvas. You know, a canvas a sheet of white cloth on a framed background is a piece of art material, right? It is specifically designed for doing art on. It has no other purpose. And so she got me to make a white suit that she then painted, because she wanted to break the concept of the canvas, right? So this idea is an item made specifically for a task has a bunch of baggage, conceptual baggage that comes with it, right? So when you make a game specifically for education, then you bring a whole bunch of context with you into that game. Whereas if you make a game initially to be entertaining, and then someone over here finds it useful for teaching something, then that creates potentially a different design path and different features in that game than you would get if you had started with education being your objective. Right? One of our things is, how do we classify those two games? Do we put them in the same category and say, well, now it's being used for education, Minecraft is a serious education game? Or do we say, no, it's a repurposing of a game for education? Is it just, the game's just a tool and we happen to be using it for education rather than using it for entertainment or wasting time or distracting people or something? Right? So you get the same with pens or paper and stuff, right? You can use them for different purposes. And so when they're repurposed, what are they? How do we name them? How do we categorize them? Do we put them in the same category? Is a knife a screwdriver? Yes. When I use a knife like a screwdriver, does that knife become a screwdriver, or is it still a knife?
Both.
It's both, or it's not. What do we think? How are we, if we're doing a taxonomy and trying to place things into a hierarchy?
And the knife would not fit with tools, or it would fit with tools, but not with the screwdriver, not with the blunt tools.
How do you, like, if you're categorizing tools, screwdriver versus knife, kitchen knife, butter knife, where do they taxonomically fall? Where do they separate? So the cook tools, let's say we go down far, what are the next category might be?
Or
Cutting and screwing.
Tools for cutting and tools for manipulating other objects, right? So, manipulating other tools.
Or tools you keep in the kitchen versus
Exactly.
tools you keep in the garage.
Yes. Which, if you keep a screwdriver in the kitchen,
Yeah, everyone has a screwdriver in the kitchen drawer.
And I have a knife in the garage.
I have a knife in my toolbox.
yeah, I certainly have a knife in my toolbox. So knives can be done in toolboxes, so they're a tool. So yeah, this is the kind of problem you have with taxonomy, right? Is when you break things up, when you come to an instance, where do you put it in your taxonomy? And does it make sense there? And this, so when I chose narrow and broad, I was thinking, well, when you're designing a game, one of the things we ask about is, who's my target audience, right? Am I trying to match a very small group where I can study them as individuals, or am I trying to group large groups of people, right? So am I trying to get all kids, where I can't just get, a couple of representatives of that and know that I've covered them all? Because if I'm only trying to match to like 5 different types of people, I don't actually need to sign it.
But you need to have it.
You scan it and you put it into the front of the book.
But then we have only our own signatures. That's okay?
Yes.
Who do we deliver it to?
And it's fronted.
Fronter?
Yes.
On the submission that is passed?
No, it's still open.
You have opened it?
Yes.
Okay, fine, I can do that.
Okay. That's good. Okay, so when narrow and broad was something that was interesting to me. It might not be a good categorization. Right? So I'm willing to accept.
It's an interesting characteristics of whether it's a good classifier or
Good
divider
feature.
categories.
So when you look at Marina's one, narrow and broad audience doesn't really fit into your categorization at all. That's relevant, right? So this is a discussion we can have. Is this relevant or not? Is your health outcome specific or general? Is that a useful separator?
It's the same as narrowing, but it does make sense, and when I read it, I know what you mean, so it makes sense when I'm reading it, and it's natural to think like that or write like that. But if you really think about it, like now, then not really a good.
If you try and operationalize it, what does that mean in practice? Is a specific health change or a generally healthy better? Where do you draw the line? Okay? If you say, if you like, is losing 5 kilograms a specific health objective or a general health objective?
A specific, because you can measure it. And that's my problem with the general thing is how do you measure it?
Generalized health outcomes.
General, make better health for the people. This game should do it. How do you actually measure the success of that game?
Well,
you need specifics.
You do public health measurements, right? So the general ones do public health measurements where they look at the overall population number of, one of the standard ways of measuring that sort of thing is where they look at number of visits to specialists or number of contacts with the health services.
So if the general health is better after the launch of Half-Life 3, then Half-Life 3 affects general health.
There is the potential that Half-Life 3 affects general health.
But you can't be certain. So general in this sense.
Well, how would
measure it?
How would you actually test if Half-Life 3 had that effect?
You have to break it down into specifics. And then test the specifics.
Necessarily test the specifics. What you could do is you could do a randomized trial on different populations where you released Half-Life 3 for some of them and not others, and measure the cross.
What do you measure?
You measured like the number of visits to doctors.
Is that the only thing? Would that mean, I mean, would you ask if they are happy or not happy? Would you look at the life, expected duration of life? I mean, there are many factors, and how do you weight all of them to get up with that one single number that is, this is clearly a better
helps with general
health. That's the hard part, coming up with that function. That says, I mean, you can, as you say, you can measure the specific parts of that, but how do you aggregate all this up to one number that you can test on and see this number has improved?
And I've worked with some sales, and our problem is they all make a general number for the successful outcome of something because it's always broken, or you always have so many metrics beneath. So the general number doesn't really say anything. Case in point, your reference the other day, we said that you can have a general baseline of something, and then if one segment increases 100% and the other drops to 0, it will still be the same baseline, but you have seriously affected the population.
Yes,
so
if you've aggregated across the whole lot.
Yeah, so, I don't think general is, or at least that's what the other teachers have said so far, that general is not good in research.
General is a hard one to measure, right? And you're right, it's hard to measure and it's hard to design for, right? So for example, and this is why EXA games, right? If you're saying, yeah, lumosity, right? We will make you smarter in general, right? Art's a really big claim, and it's they've got a general, but what they end up doing is trying to make you smarter on specific things, right? And EXA games, they're trying to make you healthier, right? That's not necessarily going to be an effective way of doing, of actually trying to make a good game, right? But that was the ones I broke things down to, and it made sense for me at the time to say, well, if you were designing for a very specific thing, you could look at the way a game was designed and say it was designed for either from an individual through to the whole population, and you could grade that. So there are some games where the designers say, look, I'm going to design it for everybody, right? This game should be a game for everybody.
I'm guessing you're a friend with platform driving puzzle solving RPG. That is a general game, but it's very specific.
The puzzle platforming game. Okay, can I zoom
Because
in?
it has so many general features, so it should apply to a broad audience, but still it's not. I'm guessing it has like
It's
very
relatively
limited amount
niche
of
because it doesn't do a union of all the interest groups. It does an intersection of all the interest groups, and so it ends up being a very small interest group rather than appealing to everybody who happens to like any one of those features. Right? So people who like driving games might not play it because it's got too much platforming, puzzling things going on. Right? So it's whether you do a union or intersection. So here, as a designer, I would look at narrow versus broad, and that helps me think about how I'm going to design my game. And I'd look at specific health outcome, which is measurable, versus you want me to make the game to make people generally change in some way, and that will change the way in which I design a game. Okay? This might not be, as a patient, would I use these to decide what game to try and play? Because that narrow versus broad doesn't really matter for me as a single player, whether the game was designed to be a broad game or designed for a specific condition. Is that going to be good for me? I don't really care if it was designed for it to be effective for 1 million people. If I'm inside or outside that group is more important. And it doesn't matter whether that group was 1 million people or 2 people. It matters if I'm, as a player, inside the group that it's useful for or outside the group that it's useful for. That's the important information, not some irrelevant thing about how many other people care about it. So yeah, I accept that, this was a breakdown I made to help discuss games, and discuss how they're made and who they're made for. I think my second categories make more sense. Right? I think these health outcomes, physical health, psychological health, and or cognitive health and social health are more interesting categories. Right, so you guys understood those different categories? Would you be able to use them to break down games for the outcomes for games? Do you think we could look at the games and say, oh yeah, that's a game for physical health? Or do you think that that's actually, again, going to lead to miscategorization?
Always can, I guess, but it's better. It's easier to categorize it that way.
So you can see, you could kind of think, okay, primary focus is on physical. So certainly a lot of the Wii Fit games where you're doing balance games are about physical balance, and that's very obvious. The center of the category is very obvious. Edges of the category are a bit harder, right? Or primary and secondary feature, right? Because I can make a game that's for physical health, but then add social components to it. So when you talk about going to
or saying that you are better chance of getting physical if you do it in a social setting, so it's equal amount of both.
Yes, so it's the games for health, games for cognitive health. There's a bunch of stuff which you may only relate to one, but there's others that are definitely doing a social setting. It's physical and it's cognitively challenging. All right, and certainly the dementia research shows that if you are physically active, you also delay dementia. Right? So being sedentary is cognitively bad for you when you are in Alzheimer's. Right? So there is a combination that your brain is linked to your body in interesting ways. So yeah. So
one question here is whether you like or accept overlapping categories. I mean, you can be quite happy saying there might be work that fits into several categories, and you deal with that, and you can allow yourself a little bit of overlap between the various cells. But if you need to choose one or the other, then it's important that you have clear cut borders between the various categories.
Yeah. So when you're categorizing games, are you required to have it a disjoint set, right? Set theoretically, does the have to be two distinct sets, or do they have overlaps? So, yeah, traditionally you think of gender as having two distinct sets. You're either male or female. We know now genetically that there are people in the middle that are both, but they're rare. But those would be one you kind of generally think of as being a very disjoint set. And then you get those weird fish which change gender. You've heard about those guys? Yeah, like they're all female. There's one male and the rest are females, and if the male dies, one of the females turns into a male.
Like Nemo's father.
Yes, yeah, those.
That would be a female.
Yeah.
After the mother died.
Yes. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, so those kind of changing gender is something that does happen, but normally you think of those as distinct categories. Okay? I then go in here. I say, okay,
one question: is the emotional and social always linked?
Yeah. So I put these social and emotional health together. Should they?
Why did you do it? Is it because they often overlap? Or?
Why did I put social and emotional together? I put social and
Less
emotional.
tangible.
Well,
All the fuzzy
it's the other category, right?
Yeah.
Physical is obvious.
Others.
Cognitive is obvious. And, there's all that fluffy stuff that other people deal with, and it's a thing. No, I put them together because when I was looking at how people were referring to social health issues, they were generally talking about emotional states, right? And when they're talking about emotional health issues, they were usually doing it in relation to other people, right? So I found commonly they were put together. There certainly are some areas which are distinctly just social with no emotional aspect, right? So you could look at people who have distinct diagnosis. So if you are autistic, right, you have social challenges, right? So you could argue that are they socially healthy because they're not they're able to socialize normally. They could be very happy, right? So emotionally, their emotions are disjoint from their socialization. So, and they don't recognize emotions in others. That's one of the challenges for a lot of the autistic spectrum disorder, is the inability to empathize and see emotions in other people. And so their social and emotional health is disconnected. So should they be put together? Possibly not. In the normal community, are they kind of the same, similar? I would say they probably are. But I'm willing to take arguments against that one. What are you guys' thoughts? Is social and emotional categories you should put together, or should I have updated this, and should I update this and make them separate categories? Social health, and then a separate category for emotional health. And is then emotional health just a part of cognitive health? Do you consider those two separable, or are they connected?
I think no. There's always an emotional part in social, at least in healthy, normal people. But I think there can be emotional or emotion without social, without being anything in normal or.
So in normal, you have some things which are emotional health issues about how you feel, which aren't related to socialization of any kind.
Anger management. Would anger management be just emotional or social? Or
well, yeah, my immediate thought is anger management is social, because you don't need anger management if you're in the woods by yourself.
Well,
okay,
you
but
may,
your car, if you have anger problems
You do.
in the car, you must start your car. Maybe
Yeah, but
no one around.
It doesn't matter.
It's gonna be expensive for you.
You know, but does it matter if you're angry and there's no one to be angry at?
No, it matters to that individual.
It does.
Yeah.
It's not a good health if you always have.
If you're always angry, but
angry
you're
rounds.
you become a hermit because you hate people so much and you're angry all the time. Does it? Yeah,
The social aspect is not the only aspect.
of
When
emotion.
you're angry, when you're
Oh, you
really
mean-
angry, when you have problems with being angry, that I think that also influences body, like
Yeah, yeah,
maybe
of
blood
course.
pressure or something. So that can be affected too without the.
Any social aspect. So an angry hermit could still be in need
Oh,
of
definitely.
Intervention.
an intervention
Yeah.
to make them a calm hermit.
When Maslow created his pyramids of needs, he put these two things in different categories. Esteem
That's right.
higher, or as one level up from social.
Mhm.
So he said that your social needs outweigh your need for self-esteem or for a calm mind.
So he put them in different categories.
Two different
Should me grouping the games that are designed with those in mind, is it unreasonable to group them? Would it more be a category but then break down into smaller subcategories?
Then what?
I feel like in health, you shouldn't put them together, but games can help. Yeah, maybe, but in health in general, then I think it would be wrong to put them together because you can have social problems without having emotional problems and the opposite. But in games, maybe they are kind of similar games, or that those games are developed for both.
Games designed around helping in those areas tend to look similar. How would you design? How does it affect the design? If you're saying, "Oh, this is a game for emotional health," how does that look different from a game designed for social health? Well, I could argue that you would say that they're the games for social health are usually multiplayer and look at social interactions because they're for social health. Whereas emotional ones can be much more introspective and just look at you and how you view yourself and how you feel about yourself, and can be very single player experiences.
Yeah, more emotion based than social. Yeah.
Reflection and internal focused than externally focused.
Quantified self is in no way social.
Yeah, so quantified self is, as you say, no way social.
And also the other game we had the other day about autism, that isn't really and that is well, that doesn't fit in the other category as well. So they don't necessarily overlap.
How often do they? I mean, the question is, how often do they overlap? Because does emotional health overlap more with cognitive health, or less? Or do we need to create something with 4 categories? That is, first, do we think like games for physical health is a reasonable category?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sports.
Games, anything that changes your body activity, we could
I have
claim.
a question about it. I wrote it here as well. When we talk about serious games and we touch into physical health serious games, it isn't like traditional football basically a physical health serious game? Or does it have to be in the form of computerized?
No, that's why I used the Olympics as an example of a serious game.
Yeah.
But it's actually a game for social change, is the Olympics as such. Is football a serious game for physical health?
Or like gymnastics or whatever. Because we're talking about dementia.
Yeah. I would claim that football is often repurposed to be for physical health. Right? The motivation people have to play it is to keep fit. Right? So, but the game itself wasn't really designed as a game to keep people fit. The original Olympic Games were designed as military, like the ancient Olympics were military training games. Right? They were games for military training. That's certainly what they were. They're physical games for military training. There have been games created, particularly in the military, for physical health. Right? So we made this game so that will keep people more physically active. Right? Keep our soldiers ready for combat. Right? Football wasn't really one of those. Right? It was created more out of leisure than out of purpose. So its inception was not a serious game for physical health. Is it used as a serious game for physical health? Yes, certainly. Right? In the same way, Portal was being used as a cognitive game. And Age of Empires is used as a teaching about resource management and civilizations, right? And how they develop and expand. But no, I fully accept you could throw in tangible games, physical games, in IRL, in real life games. I think things like Ultimate Frisbee are often used by computer scientists to remain physically active. And it throws away some of the issues that you have with physical games, but it's still physical. So very strongly focused on the spirit of the game rather than competitiveness. So,
yeah, but I think like if you ask the people who play soccer or frisbee why they play it, very few will say I play it because I want to be physically fit. They play it because they like it or because they meet friends or whatever. They don't see the. I think being physically fit is a side effect really of playing the game, not the main purpose of playing the game.
And you could also, for some people, will certainly say they go and play football for social, so they'll get to meet people. Right?
Yeah.
They do it for the social aspects.
But would that be part of classifying it as a serious game or not? I mean, if they do it because it's fun to play, it's not a serious game. Is that the implication of what you're saying? I mean, is football a serious game because it has a game for health. Now, if you're saying that, okay, if you play it because it's fun, not because it's for fitness, then it's not a serious game. The implication of that statement is quite broad. It's that any game we decide, if people start to play it because they like playing it, not because they want to learn, then it's not a serious game. I don't think that's you want to go that.
I know, but I don't think soccer was designed as a serious game. I don't think soccer is a serious game.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an active debate in the community, right? In the serious game community. This sort of thing is something we are still going to conferences and yelling at each other about, right? Is, do we call this a serious game or not? Do we call it a gamification of something or not? What do we call this thing? Do we have a good taxonomy that we can actually name things appropriately and get people to agree that that's the name for that thing, right? That's what we're still currently struggling with. It's a young discipline. That's why we're still struggling with it. Is football a serious game?
And my argument is, if it is a serious game for fitness, it's a very badly designed serious game for fitness. Because most of the players just stand there, do nothing. You know?
Most of the time.
And the keeper,
the goalkeeper.
yeah, the goalkeeper. That's what's with that?
If you look at the
Are you back to the true
intention
sports spending?
to define if it's a serious game, I think that's going a bit too far.
Okay, so you would say, looking at the intention
When you
of the
say
design
football
of the
is a
game.
serious game, people play it to stay fit, then I think that's going too far. We cannot always look at the individual. Why does someone play it, or is it more like, for what purpose do we design it?
So the question here is its serious game-ness a construct of the people playing it, or a category created by its designers, or is it some combination? All right, so this comes to one of those philosophical points of what do we mean when we label something, right? Is that label created by the way we use it, or was it created when it was designed, or is it some other social construct which we just have to all agree on whether or not it is a category, and then it just is that category by our agreement. So what do you guys thoughts on that? Because that is a big philosophical debate. That goes for thousands of years, what like the categories of things.
I think it's most the marketing term, meaning that all existing products you wouldn't use the term for it. So existing games, existing activities, you wouldn't use serious games. Serious games is something that you want to use as a marketing term for something new and novel.
Right, and I would quite happily say that it's not like that, right? Because the argument against games, like the gamification, right? The whole bullshit, it's all bullshit argument, is defining how the term's used, and he's saying it's a marketing term, right? 100% marketing term. I would say that I claim the Olympics as a serious game, and the ancient Olympics was a different kind of serious game to the modern Olympics. The ancient Olympics was a serious game for military training. The modern Olympics are a serious game for social change. Right?
So let's do an interesting experiment. Go to one of the big sites for serious games and ask how many votes for the Olympics being a serious game, and see how much people agree on that.
Right, a forum, one of the serious game forums, and see if people vote for the Olympics being a serious game.
Yes.
We can conduct that as an experiment. Would you like to conduct that this semester and get some answers this semester for whether the game developers on serious games, game developers consider the Olympics as a serious game or not?
I think it'll trigger quite interesting discussions.
It should trigger an interesting discussion.
I think we would need very international answers from a lot of different countries to see how differently it's
perceived, because you think it might be perceived differently in different countries.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it might be culturally specific. Yeah.
Because we could try and contact the ideas channel guys and push that as an idea for him to make explore, right? Is the Olympics a serious game?
So who of you think the Olympics is a serious game?
Who would accept my argument that it's a serious game?
For politics or for military training?
The modern Olympics is a serious game for social change.
Maybe not the social change bit, but for politics, yes, and politics effects.
For political agenda fulfillment.
I think it's more, because when you see how people talk during the Olympics and everything, it's maybe not so much about social change, but it's about, is it?
Mission statement.
Does it work that way?
It's about Coca-Cola selling the most ass.
So there's a different question, but that's a different question again. Is there a difference between intention and effect?
And isn't a serious game supposed to have an effect, not an intention?
Well, when you design the again, so this becomes a big philosophical question. If does my intent create a category, or does the effect create the category? Right. So if I intend the Olympics to be a serious game for social change, is the Olympics a serious game for social change because of the intention of the organisation, or is it a serious game for social change because, as you were saying, when you look at the way people speak to each other during the event or during the intervention, what effect does it have? What measurable social change effects does it have? And your argument could be, well, look at where the Olympics are held a year, like the year before and the year after. Has there been a positive social change in those contexts? And if your answer is obviously not, then how can it be a game for social change?
Look at Korea, look at Russia. Did anything change? It was a lot of commotion, but did Russia change their attitudes towards homosexuals?
No, it got worse.
Yeah. Did the Chinese change their attitudes toward poverty and disabled people?
No, it got worse.
Right? No.
Was there benefit to Brazil for the Soccer World Cup?
No.
No.
Poverty increased.
So the question here is, does something have its category by the intention of the people designing it, or by the effects that it has?
I think not only the intention is interesting. When they say this is to improve, but they need to argument at least a little bit how it's meant to improve. People going there, doing sports, doing competition, going home. How is that meant to improve anything? I don't see it.
To improve their wallets, because if they get gold, they get
Kiss and
more
then kill each other.
It improves my knowledge of the existence of other countries. Yay. I don't think that's really any.
I've got to find the mission statement of the IOC. There is a mission statement here somewhere.
The last time I was seriously watching the Olympics was in '94.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was a try.
If we go to that genuine question, and this is a question for a serious game, does something become a serious game by the intention of the designer or by the effects that it has?
I think that if it's going to be because of the effect of it, then it would be hard to prove. So then you have to prove that this is a serious game, and then you have to do research on it, and you have to find out, and maybe it will take a couple of years to find out if this is actually a serious game, and then you have to prove it, and then it will kind of.
So the games for health, you could only say something was a game for health if it actually had a positive health effect.
Exactly.
No, but you can have a bad game for health, which doesn't have.
Exactly.
Like,
Which had no effect at all.
yeah, that's right. And
The
it's just
purpose is to be a serious game, and it doesn't work, then it's just a bad serious game.
An ineffective serious game.
Yeah.
So your argument here is the usage term, right? So you're looking at how we use game for health or serious game, and you're saying it's used for things not based purely on their effect. People call things serious games whether or not they have a beneficial effect or not, by something related to their nature.
I cannot only rely on the intention. I need to be somewhere in between. I could say, I plan to look out of the window at least 10 times a day. It makes me smarter.
So your intention is to look out the window.
I have an intention, but if there's no argument why this would be true, then it's pretty useless, I think.
Well, whether the category is useful or not, it's kind of a different discussion, right? But whether something has that quality of being a serious game or not. So Sebastian, you would say that you would actually say the Olympics is not a game for is not a serious game for social change because it doesn't succeed in fulfilling its objectives, or
yes.
Or is it just a bad game for social change? Is it an ineffective game for social change?
I would like to say it was not, or it wouldn't be, because that's back to your whole argument. If you have a pile of serious games,
Yep, most of the time you pull it out, oh shit, yes.
If serious games are not based on their effectiveness, then all serious games with that logic are crap. So the entire genre is crap. So serious games.
Oh no, that's not quite logically true. Okay? What you're saying is the category tells you nothing about the quality of an individual item within that category. Not that they're all crap, just that you don't know whether it's crap or not by naming it a serious game.
Yeah, but the serious part implies that this is actual, factual, working stuff. This is not a toy. This is something that you use. This is a tool. And if a hammer wouldn't be able to
have you bought a screwdriver and found that you can twist it and have it have the tip rotate because it's soft metal?
I would not call that a tool. And
that's not a screwdriver.
It's
a toy because I could go shing and have it go.
Or it's used to
was
be
it
a tool.
Was it a screwdriver when I bought it?
Well, if it was functional, yes.
But
it was a bad one.
It was a bad one because when I used it, it broke.
Yeah.
So before I used it and knew whether or not it was any good.
Serious game, you're able to measure the. If I create screwdrivers and I have a 99% chance that they will break, I'm not creating screwdrivers.
You're creating something that looks like screwdrivers.
Then if you make a serious game, then you have to. How many people?
Does it need to work for?
Exactly, and how many? How many people do you need to test the game for, and the game developed for one kid, how do you know if that's a serious game? You only have one telling you if it's working or not, or maybe not telling you.
On the one kid,
It's really hard to prove if you define it like you want to.
Yeah.
If it's a serious game or not.
Well, I think that in all classification, it's a question of what are we going to use it for? Why are we using it? And then I try to keep it simple. Anything invented before 2000 is not a serious game. Because serious game is something we use now for separating some types
entertainment-focused game.
Yeah, some types of new software developed for a serious purpose versus just for fun. That's my reason for applying the term. That's my reason for using the term. And anything invented before 2000 was just a serious game because
to actively apply something or categorize something. Or
to me, I mean, whenever you categorize it, it's for a purpose. I mean, it's to easily find it, identify it, whatever. And to me, it's interesting for the type of software developed now that's game-based, but we want to use it for serious purpose. Anything invented before that is not of interest. It is what it is.
Take Isaac's game. Is that a serious game? Do you know Isaac's game?
No.
Okay, it's you take a bunch of things and then you put a cloth, or you make people look at it, and you put a cloth on it, and then you remove one thing, and then you take it back, and then you have to pick which item must remove.
Right.
That was invented to improve your cognitive ability.
Right.
It's a guy that wanted to train a child to remember more. This was made, I don't know, many thousand years ago, at least a couple hundred years ago. Is that not a serious game? Because it was not
Per
created
definition,
after.
no.
By definition, it's not.
By definition, it's not.
My definition, it is.
Yeah, mine too.
Right? So we disagree on whether we would categorize something as a serious game or not. And you guys have to work out what you as individuals categorize as a serious game, and then say, when you use the term, what you mean by it. That's the challenge in any of this area is defining terms. What do we mean? And this is the problem with gamification. What do we mean by gamification? Do we mean Ian Bogust's, I'm using it as a marketing term only, and it's all bullshit just to impress you? Or can we use it in a different way? Or are we using it in a different way? And this question of what are the essential aspects of a thing, and do they get them by the intention of the designer or by the nature of the thing in use by humans, or independent of human use? That is again another category of does something. This is the whole, and I'm sorry to go very philosophical, but does a tree falling in the wood make a sound? Right?
There's no one around.
Yeah, a tree falling in an empty wood, does it make a sound? Right? You guys have heard that one before?
How can you tell?
What is your thought answer to that? What do you guys normally answer to that?
Trees always make a sound when they grow, so it would make a sound if no one heard it.
Even if no one hears it, it still makes a sound. Okay, so your answer is it does make a sound. Other people? Does it make a sound? Votes for making a sound?
We didn't know.
And you don't know? Vote for not making a sound? Okay. A tricky question to answer. One of the things is, are the leaves green? It makes a sound if the leaves are green or brown.
Well, basically, it's a Schrodinger's cat question.
No, I would say it's not a Schrodinger's cat.
Well, it is, because if you put the cat in a box and you walk away and take a random person who doesn't know what condition the cat was in when you put it in the box and ask him, is the cat alive or dead? That person won't know, because he knows there's a cat in there, he just doesn't know the condition of the cat, which is the exact same thing with a tree falling in the woods. If you know a tree will fall, and you know that tree makes sound when you fall.
No,
No, that's where it
different.
comes. Because it's not whether or not it made a sound in the sense of I said it fell, right? Which means there was physical activity occurring. So certainly air moved when there was movement of that tree. So the question is actually, does air movement independent of an ear listening to it create what we consider sound. Because is sound a concept that only relates to humans hearing and therefore doesn't exist independent of a human listening to it? Or animals or anything to perceive it, right? If there's nothing to perceive that air movement as anything other than air movement, is it a sound? In the same way, is the color green? Or is it just, electromagnetic waves that are vibrating at particular frequencies? So is 540 nanometers or whatever green or not? Well, it's kind of only green if there's someone to see it as green. Without a human, there is no green concept. Without a human, there is no sound. There is air movement
Of certain frequencies.
of certain frequencies, but maybe no sound. So is sound a property only created because of the existence of the observer? So in the game serious games, is it a serious game only if it's effective for at least one person? Or does it have the feature of being a serious game based on the creation of the designer who made the game deciding to call it a serious game? So you're on there, no, it's got to have an effect before you should be able to
I'm
call
going
it.
to contradict myself because
Yeah.
when you started talking about this, I thought about modern art. And for me,
Yeah.
art is art, but it's still just a bunch of random ass stuff put together. Like the fences down here, they're brilliant,
Right,
but it's just a bunch of fences put together.
right.
To make a shape.
To me, they kind of look left over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is art.
Yeah.
Someone
I would-
intentionally made art.
I would certainly agree with you that it is art, right? And that's why I would claim that serious games are serious games. The quality of that serious game, whether it's a good serious game or a bad serious game, that I think is measurable, right? That is something you go and you see if it, like, how good a thing it is at the thing it intends to be, right? So how good a serious game is the Olympics? Potentially completely crap, right? It is a crap serious game for social change.
Yeah.
But it is intended to be a serious game for social change, therefore I will call it a serious game for social change.
Yeah, but was it really designed this way?
Yes.
Who designed it this way?
Pierre de Coubertin.
Okay.
He explicitly
So
designed
what
it.
elements he used for that?
Well, the original Model Olympics had like poetry and stuff as competitive sports, right? And so, it was a whole bunch of sports which weren't physical that were in the Model Olympics. And he basically wanted to create an environment where different cultures could come together independent of the other political structures. Right?
But was the Olympics also used to resolve conflicts between countries?
Ancient Olympics.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was different. I would consider the ancient Olympics a different category of serious games than the modern Olympics. Right? So they're still called the Olympics, but they're actually intentionally designed with different objectives. Why were they designed with different objectives, or why would I?
Why do you? Because in like if there now is to ease or improve social communication, for instance, in the one can then argue that in the ancients they used these sports to resolve conflicts between countries, and isn't that exactly the same thing we do now?
No, well, the ancient ones were for military training initially, right?
Yeah.
They then moved to use them for resolving national conflict. Is different for social change. So we're using it as a tool for international arbitration of dispute. Is different to having a beneficial effect for the individuals and the community.
Yeah, but there's still propaganda in a sense.
Is all social change propaganda? That's an interesting extending how far does propaganda go, right? So is an anti-smoking message propaganda?
Depends on how large nation it is.
Okay, so you would say an anti-smoking health message
Yeah.
is propaganda.
It can be.
Define what is the right term. And that's smoking. Not smoking is good. So that makes it not propaganda. That makes it, so that makes it informative.
so yeah, okay, so you're going to have to go and get your train. But so in summary, hopefully you understand the challenges of making taxonomies, right? You accept that, Mimosa said she actually quite enjoyed reading the paper because it was relatively well written. So that was nice of her to say. So you guys did find it relatively easy to read?
Yeah.
Were you as critical of it as you're reading as you are now?
No.
No.
I was pretty critical because I know it was yours.
So you're quite happy to be critical?
But
I'm even more critical
so
now. Yeah. And I think I hopefully I've encouraged you to be even more critical, because that's what you do as an academic. You criticize stuff. And sometimes you have to criticize your own work, your own previous work, saying, that was a bit shit, right? Those categories weren't well defined.
You kind of criticize yourself when you're saying, it's too testing it. Isn't really enough, but it makes some. But you didn't tell why you just used this different thing.
Why we were only able to get 6 during the time of the master's thesis. Time limitation.
Yeah, well, but you could have told, said why, what the reason was for just testing these people.
Yeah.
You only said maybe it's enough, but you didn't say we don't have more resources, or you didn't argument.
Yeah, and that it would have been more explicit if I had made those arguments. Yeah.
But okay, so the reason was because they didn't have more time and
More time and research. And we're doing lots of cycles through the people.
So this was your master's thesis?
That wasn't mine. No, this was one of my students. He did his master's thesis on this.
Oh, okay.
So I'm reporting his results, not my results. No.
And what grade did you get?
I think a B.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it got a B. Correct. Maybe a C, probably a B. He wrote pretty well. But yeah, I'm still doing 6 iterations of playtesting in elderly homes takes a lot of time. And doing interviews with them all and interviewing some of the dementia patients where they play the game and then immediately go, what game? Your semi-structured interview very quickly falls down because you've got all these questions about the game. So what do you think of the game? What game? Okay, all the rest of my questions are pretty much useless now, aren't they? Yeah. So yeah, that there are challenges with working with people with dementia, but hopefully you guys find that debate interesting in terms of categorization of things. Right? It is a big philosophical debate. It's one that every serious games conference and journal and environment has to deal with, is what do we include and exclude, and what do we mean by these things, and how we measure effect, and so good versus bad. I actually had that. I had the disagreement with the author of our first year textbook, right, where he defines what games are, and he had a whole bunch of definitions. And for me, some of those make the distinction between a good game and a bad game, not between whether it is a game or not a game, right? So enjoyable. Enjoyable for me is a scaling factor, and talks about whether a game's a good game or not.
And it's subjective.
And it's quite subjective, and so I can't see that you can use it.
You can make an unenjoyable game on purpose.
You could make a game that was not enjoyable, given the objective of making.
Also try
Especially
to
if it
make
was
lots of
a
money.
Yeah.
Cow clicker, yeah.
It wasn't meant to be enjoyable.
No, it was meant to be a satirical comment about the stupidity of games, and it came out, people enjoyed it accidentally. But yeah, so for me, some of those things make the distinction between a good game and a bad game, rather than whether or not it fulfills the category of being a game. And so I agree with you, the serious game nature, it can be a serious game and a bad serious game. Right, so So when you're doing your hierarchy and you're saying this is a serious game, would you put fun as is the game fun or not fun as a sensible separation in our taxonomy? I don't know if that makes any sense to try and break games down that this is a fun game and this is not a fun game.
No, that's probably doesn't bring.
I guess from a serious game point of view, it's probably, if it's not fun, you probably missed altogether. So it should all be fun.
You're not gonna. You've made. If it's not fun at all,
If it's less fun to play
it's
it
more
than
like
to
work.
read about
Exactly, it's not the game.
then
No one's
It's
gonna
a
play
boring
your boring game if it's a boring game. It's the one you just make a task. And
it's just only a bit more interesting than reading about the information. Then
No, I
it's
disagree.
a bad game, but
I
you will
disagree.
prefer it.
Because
Reading it?
let's say you have films, educational films, and you have films which are fun to watch and those which you rather not watch, but you still watched it. You may still learn through that film whatever the
Yeah.
intention was,
Yeah,
right?
per definition.
And a lot of films are like that, right?
Playable.
yes, you see, do you include how enjoyable it is as part of the definition of the word game? No? And that's the serious games, that's the challenge, right? Because if you say that every game has to be fun, then you eliminate all games that aren't
No.
necessarily fun, that are horror games, for example, which you might not consider fun, but you still might play.
Yeah.
Or challenging, right? Which might not be fun, but may be interesting or informative or challenging, or maybe other motivation other than joy that is getting you to play it.
You could treat serious game as an intervention. Like if I have phobias of spiders, I may not pick games about spiders to play them because I just don't like it. But as a medicine, I will play this game because I know it will make me better, right?
Even though I don't like
Even
it, and
though-
it's not fun.
Yeah, it's like a medicine. I mean, it tastes doesn't need to taste good.
Then you could think again. Why is it a game if you see pictures of spiders on the screen? We have the game part.
No, I'm not talking about seeing pictures. I'm talking about actually interacting, playing some sort of game with spiders in it, right? Which for me is
And
not fun.
Spider.
Yeah.
You guys are all probably on the arachnophobic scale, right?
So-
Because arachnophobia is a scale, right?
It ranges from no phobia until highly phobia.
Exactly. High phobics cannot read the word spider without having a physical response, right? So if they see the word written down, they have physical response and have a terror response to the written word.
Reminds me of the movie.
Yeah, that's the high end of phobia, right? That you cannot have the abstract representation of the word of the thing and not stress. And apparently the non-phobic scale is being comfortable having spiders crawling in and out of your orifices without having any stress.
Or what? No.
So opening your mouth and letting a spider crawl through it and crawl out again. If that has no response from you, you have no phobia for spiders. Yeah, no, that's
Maybe
like
I
no
have
tool.
some response.
Yeah, but I get that. So yeah, if you don't like a spider crawling in and out of your mouth, you're slightly arachnophobic.
What if I just don't like things scrolling?
You're slightly phobic to everything. Yeah. So no, apparently that was the scale. I thought, wow, that no scale. I'm not sure there's many people way down that end. There's probably almost the same number at the terrified of the word as there are especially happy crawling all over your face and in and out of your ears and stuff.
Maybe less people.
There might be less
Yeah.
that get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But there are people who are comfortable with that, right? They'll sit, they have pet spiders and they'll let them crawl all over them and stuff.
The pet spiders.
Wouldn't
Maybe not
bug
the
me too
really
much.
poisonous.
But no, we're talking non-poison spiders, right? Because phobias, you are not you don't have an irrational fear of sharks if you're swimming on an Australian beach. Because
Quite rational.
that's quite a rational fear of great white sharks, because there are quite a few of them and people regularly get killed. So having a fear of being killed by something that kills you isn't
Being afraid of
Well,
snakes is usually
vending
good.
machines kill more people than sharks. So if you stand,
Not many vending machines while you're swimming at Bondi Beach.
no. Oh,
So-
I swam with a dolphin at Bondi Beach actually.
yes, yeah, no, I've swum with dolphins in New Zealand, but having a fear of something that can kill you is a rational fear. But as you say,
Not phobia.
it's not a phobia, right?
Yeah.
A rational fear is not necessarily a phobia.
Everything can kill you.
Maybe you can choke on a spider.
Actually, yeah.
Actually, though they found in Australia, since it brought an anti-venom, the spider deaths are all related to like spiders. Apparently the most common one is spiders in the visor. When people lower the visor, the spider drops on their onto them while they're driving, and they swerve and they hit stuff and die. So that's how spiders kill people in Australia now, because the anti-venoms are so good that you get bitten by a spider, they give you anti-venom, you don't die. But you drive your car into a tree, it's not really anti-tree that they can inject you with that stops the bleeding. But yeah, so no, there's
Excellent.
anti-accident venom. Yeah, injection. I've had an accident.
That's a perfect.
Paraphobic or something. Paraphobic or something. People are afraid of trees and inanimate objects.
you could be phobic to all sorts of things. But yeah, so having rational fears.
There's a trick with that though, because they do have a certain percentage of car accidents which have no explanation, and that's why they say, well, we kind of speculate that it's insects or spiders kind of causing it, because people just suddenly hit the tree or something, yeah, and there is no reason. They're perfectly healthy and so on, and in the report, like, because the insect is not there anymore after. So
doesn't
it's sort
hang
of,
around the scene of the crime.
How do
Yeah.
you define if it's irrational or irrational fear? Because I'm afraid of heights, and but I'm really afraid of heights, so it's really irrational because I can hurt myself if I fell down where I'm afraid. So is it rational or not?
Like you can jump your climbing and we get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is
That's
a
right.
rational fear when your chances of the thing you are afraid of happening are far lower than your response to it would suggest, right? So being afraid of heights while you're creeping along a cliff face is probably not irrational, right? But being afraid of it when you're standing on a boat with a rail and that you're kind of standing near
On
the
the
edge
rail, really.
and it's got, a good high rail, it's nice and safe. If you're still afraid, then you're probably being irrational.
That's hard to define.
no, it's quite
It's a
easy.
scale. It's a scale, and you define it as
Yeah.
a likelihood measure, right? So I was more afraid of driving with my mother, right? Because she would follow too close and drive too fast, right? Than I was of going mountain climbing, right? Because I felt safer attached to doing bungee jumping, right? And I have very low vertigo, right? So I have vertigo. I'm not afraid of heights, right?
Yeah.
So when I bungee jumped, I didn't actually get a big adrenaline kick because I felt safe.
Did you do it in New Zealand in the really tall one?
Not in the really tall one. No, I did
You
it
done
from.
it?
I did it from a crane, right? I did it from a big,
Okay.
big.
Okay.
They.
Because New Zealand has one of the tallest ones.
Oh, we also have we have like the Sky Tower has one where you bungee jump off the tallest building and stuff.
I did it in Cairns,
Yeah, you didn't Cairns.
but
Yeah.
it was really scary. But I've been doing everything I can to not be afraid of heights.
So for me, I didn't get much of an adrenaline kick. I was more afraid driving with my mother than I was bungee jumping, right? Because she was following too close and driving too fast, and I felt
Unsafe.
more risk of us dying because she was not in control of the
But
vehicle.
it's probably true.
I probably was actually in more danger with my mother driving
Yeah.
than doing
Or
the bungee
in
jumping.
driving in general.
But being a cyclist in Dunedin, I felt more afraid than doing bungee jumping. Right? I got more adrenaline from cycling around Dunedin than I did from doing a bungee jump because I'm actually in more risk. And I specifically know people who have been killed doing the activity I was doing, which was cycling in Dunedin. One of our lecturers was killed by a truck on the way to work. So, and there was another person in Edmund who was killed cycling in Dunedin. So, whereas I don't know anybody who'd got killed bungee jumping. So.
But did you know anyone who tried it?
Tried bungee jumping?
Yeah.
Almost everybody in New Zealand tried bungee jumping.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty much everybody I know who tried bungee jumping was perfectly
If
safe.
you didn't know anyone, and you didn't know anyone.
yeah. No. I knew lots of people who'd gone bungee jumping. None of them had had a negative experience, right? Whereas I knew specifically people who'd had. I'd had cars drive in front of me and me slide along and go off over the bonnet and stuff, and cut me off. And cycling in Dunedin is a risky activity.
It sounds more suicidal to
It's
do
an
that
extreme
than
sport.
healthy.
You have an appropriate level of fear, right? Which is adrenaline causing. Whereas, so for me, that I for some reason tend to have a fairly accurate assessment of the risk I'm in, and respond to that. So yeah, so for me, I have a low phobic scale, right? Doesn't mean I don't take risks. I just kind of know what risk I'm taking when I take it. Whereas a lot of people will take more risk when they drive than they probably should, right? And aren't as afraid as they probably should be, because they get very casual and feel very safe, even when the speeds they're traveling at are quite dangerous, as you can tell by the number of people who actually die in car accidents, or perhaps worse, are seriously injured. Right? Because, I don't know, is it worse to become a tetraplegic and have constant health issues for the rest of your life than to die? Don't know. I think I'd probably
Don't want to know.
I think I'd probably yeah, I don't want to know. I think I would choose to be a tetraplegic rather than die, but yeah, when my father, like my stepfather, was going through the last stages of cancer, he, like the painkilling, he just wanted them to give him enough morphine so that he wouldn't feel pain. But if they did, he'd die because he was terminal cancer. And they're like, well, he's not getting better, right? Doesn't matter if he has kidney failure and liver failure, because he's gonna die, right? He knows this. Why can't you just give him enough painkiller to stop the pain? Because it will kill him. But he's okay with that. Just so long as he has a few days without pain, that would be better than having 2 weeks in constant pain. Having 3 days with no pain would be better. So, yeah,